What's up, everyone? This is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of MG Poland, JS Poland, AngularMaster.dev, and WorkshopFest.dev. Welcome back to JavaScript Master Podcast. Today, we've got special guest from Berlin, Germany, Principal Program Manager for browser tools at Microsoft, JavaScript lover, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Heilmann. Hi Chris, how are you?
I'm good. With all the craziness going on around me, it's amazing, but I'm actually feeling quite good. Yeah.
That's perfect. So please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
I'm Chris Heilmann. I'm Principal Program Manager for Developer Tools in Microsoft. So I'm looking at the Edge developer tools and the integration with Visual Studio Code and other things around that area, especially. I've been a web developer for 25 years or something like that. Did a lot of DevRel before, and now been in this role for 3 years, I think, and at Microsoft for 7 years, which is quite shocking. But that's how fast it goes.
The robots are coming, and we need to make a great example for them. What do you mean by these texts? How we can set a good example for them?
That's from my Twitter bio, and I think I was really excited about machine learning when it came out and when it became a big mainstream thing, when the machines became affordable and powerful enough to do it. I mean, it's been concepts in the 50s. And I think it's important to understand that everything we do online and every interaction we do with a computer is being recorded and it's being analyzed and it's being changed. So every social platform that we use has a certain idea of what we are by the things we consume, by how we talk to other people, and how we interact with other people. And machines are learning basically the way how people communicate with each other through these. So I think right now is a very important time to actually be very cognizant of what you do online and how you interact with other people and what you consume, because consumption means support. So by looking at something that's horrible, you're already giving it a thumbs up internally to the machines. So I think it's really important that we right now have a lot of companies that start making machines think like humans, and they need good examples. And if we give them horrible examples, we get horrible scenarios. We all saw these AIs or machine learning models that actually are racist or are prejudiced by just getting information from people that was racist and prejudiced. So things like satire or things like cynicism doesn't go down well online any longer now that we're monitored 24/7. And that's what I meant by them. I would love to be computers to be more human, but I also want them to reflect the best of humanity and not the loudest and the worst.
Exactly. Yeah, that's well said. Let's talk about your history. So what computer did you start programming on?
My first computer was a Thomson TO-770, and that came with a cartridge that was Microsoft Basic 1.0. It didn't have a means of saving something, so there was no storage device like a tape or a floppy disk. So I wrote the same thing every single day, and then when I turned it off, the machine it was gone again. So that's how I learned how to optimize my work every single day. And then the first computer I really went to town on was a Commodore 64. And that's still one of my favorite machines and still one of my hobbies out there to do things for that one. So I did use BASIC on that one. And then I soon jumped into machine code like assembler and wrote some games, wrote some tools, and actually generally came from playing games to programming, because I was terrible at playing games. So I analyzed the games to give myself endless lives and turn off collisions and things like that. And that's how I learned programming, by basically working around my own limitations as a gamer. And that was something that brought me back to the web later on as well. The same as like the view source of the web reminded me very much of my career in that case, learning from other people's code and learning by circumventing protections and just learning what's there. And I thought it was a really interesting machine to work with.
What was your first computer program you were proud of?
I think there was one. I won a competition once. There was like a basic program which I cheated because I actually had like a lot of data sets that basically wrote an assembly program, and that was that you could edit the screen and enter the restore button and save it as a file. So that was something that I thought was really clever because you didn't have to load anything into memory, and that was the first thing that I basically made some money with as well, like a ridiculous amount of money. But it was just like really cool to see my name in a computer magazine and like, wow, that was me. And of course, none of my family knew what the hell was going on. They all hate computers and don't know what it is, but it was just exciting for me. So that was really, really cool. And later on, I got really excited when I got my name into the JavaScript book, the one with the rhino on the front, because I learned JavaScript from that book, and I became a tech editor for a chapter on XML and JavaScript, which is a horrible idea, and we should never use. But getting the offer was great to have my name in the book that I learned everything from. So that was really nice to see. Interestingly enough, a lot of the successful things that I've written over the years that I released as open source are things that that are absolutely horrible by now, like really bad quality things, and like you shouldn't use any longer. Like I did some DHTML menus that sold really well back then, and I also did them. Like everybody in PHP wrote a content management system that is absolutely flawed and terrible, but people are still asking about those. So it's interesting to see that successes that you once had will follow you for the rest of your life, same as failures.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What has changed since you started programming in your perception of the world of technology?
I think the interesting thing for me was like I was always bored by enterprisey software. I never wanted to pay for an editor or a development environment. I hated build processes. I just basically loved that I could write code and actually see it immediately, see the change immediately. That's why JavaScript became so exciting for me. And I think now when we look at it, like we're back at square one. We're back at the olden days. Like when you talk to Java guys in the 90s, and you were like starting with JavaScript in 1999, you're like, oh, that's a great idea. That's great. No, it's not professional. And you just get the same with the web right now. Everybody starts with a build script. Everybody starts with a framework. Nobody actually goes down to the writing by hand any longer. So I think it's interesting that we're getting full circle in that. So whilst programming in between, especially on the web, was very much down to the metal and doing one thing at a time and writing everything by hand and understanding everything that you do right now, we're back at a place where we're actually dependent on lots and lots of other software, and we just put different puzzle pieces together to make a product out of it. So the end product is more the focus than the code itself. And I think that's changed just the last few years, and it's going to be interesting where it's going to lead us, if it's an overhead complexity that we don't need, or if it actually empowers a lot of people that don't want to go down to the nitty-gritty details like I did and actually get started. So you can get somebody like a React template, and they can start building, or an Angular template, and they can start building an app by saying like, okay, that's a button, here's how you do it. And while I had to understand how to get the button on the screen and learn about everything that's broken, we don't need to do these things any longer. So there's always like an interesting mix there. I think the biggest issue for me when it comes to web programming is that when I started, it was a geeky, starty thing that just a few people did. And now it's just common. Like when we don't even understand any longer how the web works, so we just expect it to be there. People don't know what offline means. I was offline a week ago or so on holiday, and it just felt weird not to be able to connect at all. It just felt like something that I wasn't used to any longer. And in the back of the days, it's like you wrote your stuff and then you went online, uploaded it, and hoped it worked. And nowadays we just expect to be online all the time. So there's an interesting change as well. I think that what we do as web developers runs the world nowadays. It's not a niche little market on the side. Like without us, there wouldn't be any transactions in social life and in money transfers and these kind of things out there. It's interesting.
Do you think software rule the world?
I think people rule the world. I think software makes the world work. Sadly enough, it doesn't make the world work as much as we think it would be. It's quite now hilarious. Like my partner just has COVID, and I used the app and to report that I had contact with her, and I expected within like seconds to get a report back from the government saying like, oh, here's your test center, go there and have your test. Nothing happened in 5 days or 6 days. So I think the world that we're in right now, the problems that we have right now shows that software doesn't run the world right now. There's still a lot of layers of humans in between, for good or bad, that actually delay the whole thing. I think without software, the world would be very different right now. But I think there's also a danger of overestimating how important it is. There's a lot of stuff that still goes on with like ring binders, paper prototypes, and rubber stamps. And bureaucracy is the thing that still exists a lot. So it's interesting. But then again, like I haven't bought anything like a car in years because I don't have a car. I don't need one. But I realized the other day when I had a rental that like nothing in there works without software any longer. When you press the brake pedal, that doesn't go to the brakes. There's a computer in between that actually stops the brakes for you and does like when you go too close to the car in front of you, it automatically would go into brakes. So there's this in between that is happening. But at the same time, I think we're overestimating our impact. And that is probably because we're bad at social interaction or at explaining to people who don't want to know computers what computers are. And that's something that I really, really want to change. Hence also the robots are coming thing. So I want people to be aware that there is an undercurrent of software that runs everything, but at the same time, the people in charge, or actually the people that have to make decisions, are not using technology to its benefits yet. They just use it because they have to. And I think it's horrible when people feel too stupid, when they feel like computers overwhelm them, because nobody is too stupid to use a computer. It's just if our software is too hard to use, then we made a mistake as user interface designers.
How many books have you written? And what is the most exciting and what is the most difficult about writing a new book?
I think I published 5 books, chapters in books. Well, okay, I published 2 books myself that I wrote myself. I published chapters in 6 or 7 other books. And I've also did some online books, 2 of them. So I think all in all, we're getting to the 8, 9 point of view. What I like about it is that it makes you think. When I wrote my JavaScript book in 2006, I thought I knew JavaScript. I was paid as a JavaScript developer professionally for years. I thought I knew everything, but I realized I just knew how to use it. I just basically realized I know how to do things, but I didn't know why. And you cannot write a book without knowing the why. So you learn a lot by teaching other people through the medium of a book. And the book format is interesting as well because you cannot change it. Like an ebook, fine, online version, fine. But as soon as it's printed, it's out there. And it's very embarrassing years later when you made mistakes in the code that you've done in your book. So I think the interesting bit is like that it makes you think about what you do much more than just publishing it and just sending it out on your blog or wherever out there. So the more detailed thing about the book was that to me, that I had to become a better writer or become a better educator by writing a book. The really practical upshot is that it stopped my parents from asking what I do for a living because they finally had something in their hand that was physical. They didn't know what the internet was. They didn't care about computers. But once there was a book with my photo on it and they could put it on the shelf, and when everybody visited them, the book came out. It was in English. They couldn't read it, but they were still super excited that their son had written a book. So I think a book is still the fascinating in-between between the physical world and the software world out there. To a degree, it makes no sense to publish books because they're outdated by the time they come out, depending on the technologies that you cover. But at the same time, you have to think about more about that. That is the reason why you have to think about better about publishing. You cannot just release a book and say like half a year later, oh, don't buy it any longer. It's stupid now, because people spend money on it and people put effort into it. And I think books are something magical because as a kid, I loved reading and it brought me into another world. And videos and these kind of courses are great, but I love that a book sparks the theater in your head. Everybody sees something different by reading a book. And that's the wonderful thing about that. That's why we're always so disappointed when movies based on books that we like are horrible, because we saw it completely different when we read the book. So it's always a bad idea. I don't think anybody's going to make a JavaScript movie about my book, but at the same time, I think it's,
why not?
It's a wonderful, if archaic form of communication, but I think it's still a beautiful thing that to think about publishing, because it is more of an effort than just writing something down and put it in online.
What is your working day like?
It's a bit weird because I'm the only one in Europe. My whole team is in America, in the West Coast, Seattle. And this means my times are completely askew. So I get up in the morning and I do my chores and I do my normal living things. And then I start working at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So I go through my emails. I go through to the feedback that we got from the products. I go through the issues on GitHub. And then I think around like 3 or 4 is when the first meetings come in. And we have a daily stand-up, which in my time is 7 o'clock in the evening, where I have to have prepared everything for my team by then, so to see what they can do for the day and what they can do for the week. We work in an agile environment, so we have sprints every 2 weeks, and we also shift a lot of time around. So as a program manager, especially as a principal program manager, I'm kind of removed from the day-to-day things more than others, because my job is to think about the next 5 years, think about the next 2 years, what's going to come in the area and how we can evolve what we're doing. And a lot of the work that I do for a company like Microsoft, which a lot of people don't underestimate, is compliance. Making sure that what we write is actually compliant with security details, privacy details. What data do we get from users? Where does it go? Do we delete it? Do we record it? What can we record? If we record it, have we told the user about recording it? And have we give them an option to say no? And of course, accessibility. So I'm an accessibility champion in the company as well. So I do a lot of reviews of all the products out there, all the web products, where we actually look at something new and I point out like, oh, this is not keyboard accessible. If you use a voice recognition, can people reach it? These kind of things. So it's an interesting mix of like being with a team and as a product manager, and at the same time thinking about what the company can do for the next few years. And I think it's interesting that I'm in a different time zone because I got like 2 or 3 hours every day where I can think about things before the meeting starts. So it's really nice to spark ideas with my team, because they then can go on and do it overnight, and next morning I'll be there to document it. It's really, really interesting that you can have more of a coverage if you spread the team out in different time zones.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Why did you choose to take on developer tours as a new experience after being in DevRel for so long? And by the way, what being a DevRel means to you?
Well, I mean, I've written the handbook on developer evangelism, as we called it back then, because I didn't know the implications about the religious meaning of it, because we don't have those in Germany. But I think the interesting thing was I've done it so long that I basically wanted to do something else. I want to be more in the doing thing and releasing products again. Like in DevRel, the danger is that you sometimes just talk about other people's stuff. You don't do it yourself any longer. You do like some demos or you do some information flow, but you actually don't actually write a lot of code yourself, or actually look at code that people do and realize the needs that people have. So it was also a pragmatic decision, because we had a team member leave and the product team actually asked me if I could fill in until we backfilled that role with somebody else. So I tried it out for a few months and I actually found it to be quite rewarding to be calling the shots of a product and concentrate on one product. Especially the developer tools were exciting to me, because that's something that I always wanted to fix for myself as a developer. I was always thinking I missed things in there, and now I got the chance to call the shots in there as well. It's also then when we moved from Internet Explorer to a new browser, to Edge. And then later on, when we actually went to Chromium, and my work together with Mozilla and with Google before in open source helped a lot with that environment as well. As to what DevRel means to me, I quite defined that in the handbook as well. I think it's still it's a communicator role. It's a translation role. You translate the needs of outside developers and inside developers to your company, and you block your company from just throwing things out that developers don't understand. And to a degree, that's what a PM does as well. Like 90% of what I do is listening to people outside, trying things out, asking people to give me feedback, and then create products to needs of the user. In this case, the developer, not the end user. So I think it's not that different. The only difference is, like, as a DevRel, you're basically more to the outside world and also giving presentations internally. Whereas a PM, you're just more in meetings and you're actually more in bug lists and issue lists, and you actually write more scenarios and white papers than you write presentations. And yeah, I realized like traveling every week and being in hotels and flying around the world is really, really cool. But it also gets very tiring after a while. And you also, I didn't want to bore people. I didn't want to be the only person that is on stage all the time. I wanted to see new faces, and I wanted to spend my time coaching other people to become presenters, coaching other people to write and to do videos. And so far that worked quite well. And I also discovered that I could just record videos and put them up there, and it's happily enough as well. I would have loved to travel to your event, but yeah, right now I'm blocked. I can't go. And but it's interesting to see how you can get well, how can I put this? You get super excited about yourself when you're on stage all the time, and you get like, it's invigorating. It's really cool to do that, but it's actually quite. I think it's actually more of an approach when you build something and you see it succeed over a longer time. It's actually also really rewarding, and I'm excited that I have more time for my team to work with them on their way how to communicate in the company and outside, and coach them on that, and see people grow around you than just doing it yourself. So that was a really big change that was exciting to me as well. I really slipped into that role of PM, but right now I'm pretty happy with it. And it's also good to see that you can do some more long-term thinking, because I think in DevRel you always have to be on the newest, coolest, hottest thing. And I realize now, looking at the feedback that I get and looking at the emails that I have to answer every day, there's a whole new world out there of people that just build stuff and do work. They don't use any of the new cool technologies. They don't know about them, but they are building actually the software that runs the world. And I think it's interesting how far we removed ourselves from these people. So it's good to be back in the world where people actually have to make a living and work with the things that I do.
It sounds like you did some very natural next step.
Yes, and it's tricky because in software world, it's not that easy. You normally, I mean, that's when I invented the role of DevRel in Yahoo back then. I was a leading programmer, senior programmer, and then I took over a team, and they wanted me to become a full-time manager and basically sit in meetings and deal with HR problems of our people and these kind of things and allocations, and I didn't want to do that. So at a certain moment in your career in IT, you're in the decision where you cannot become technical any longer. You cannot be technical any longer. You're asked to become a manager. I didn't want to do that. So now I'm still an IC, an individual contributor, that's called, not a people manager. And it's still, I do the same things. I don't write much code myself anymore, but I actually can if I wanted to. And I think it's a very tough way to. I mean, this sounds like an old man ranting, but I just realized, like, if you want to have a career that's longer, sometimes you have to then think about, like, where do I go next? And I really didn't want to be in a startup where I have to compete with 18-year-olds in my coding skills, because I don't get a kick out of that any longer. So I realized that having a larger corporation to work with and a larger team to work with was actually an exciting new thing.
What are the main problems you see with developer tools at the moment?
I think they're too complex. They're expert tools. You have to be an expert to understand them, and then they're great. Like, a lot of times we build features because experts come to us and say, like, oh, I would love to have insight into that. Whereas like 90% of the other developers out there don't even know what that is, what that means, or that use case came never up for them. So when you look at the Chromium developer tools that we're using and we're part of, it's basically a collection of things that just got added in there over and over again. New feature, new thing. And it's overwhelming. You open the things and you don't understand what's going on there. So my big motto right now is to actually not build developer tools that are for experts, but developer tools that make you an expert by using them. So instead of like having everything open for you, everything horrible with 10,000 checkboxes and submenus, you just basically see what people need to do. You look at a task-driven environment, like what tasks do developers have to do every single day? Okay, these are the 3 tools we bring front and center. These are the ones that we make as easy as possible to use. And by implementing documentation, by implementing in-context help and extension, that basically makes it a much better thing. I love, for example, as a great example, Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code started as a simple editor. It's just basically a basic editor in the center of it that is 100% doing what it's supposed to do. You don't lose any data. It's hot reloading. It's saving everything. And then they actually spend money and time on writing an extension model to allow people to extend the product to their needs rather than just building features into it that might be for a certain audience. And that was a much cleverer way than just building this one monolithic tool that does everything and trying to assume what people want to have. So the extensibility of Visual Studio Code is its biggest success factor, and the extensibility we don't have in other environments yet. And I think that's sad, and I want to work more on that one. So to put a label on it, I think it's complexity. We overwhelm beginners with like expert tools rather than giving them a tool that takes them by the hand and puts them on a journey. You don't have a journey. You don't have a user story. With our end products, we do user stories. We do user research. We basically want to make it as easy as possible to buy that thing on the website, but we don't make it as easy to understand where a network problem or a performance problem in your app is. And that's something that I think we should be considering much more. So putting more time into UX and UI of developer tools and less time into like, oh, there is a experimental feature that's only supported in Safari on iOS right now, and your developer tools should have something for that, might be a right way in the future, I think.
What are the problems you face as a developer tools creator?
Feedback is my biggest problem. I don't get enough feedback from people that I want to talk to, that basically are not excited about going on the web and reading blog posts every day, are not looking at every YouTube video. You get a lot of feedback from people that are experts and want more expert tooling in the developer tools. You don't get enough from people that basically have to build the same website for the last 12 years and would love to learn about more of the issues in there. It's exciting because we do it internally right now. We have a whole new thread of work where we go to different teams within Microsoft and just talk to them about their day-to-day life and what problems they face when building the app that they're doing. And we just released a feature called Detached Elements in the Edge Developer Tools last week. And that one is actually based on feedback from a team that actually realized our app is leaking memory. We have no idea why. And we assume it's that. And then we did some testing and we realized it was that. And then we built an interface for them and put it in the developer tools. So I think there is a lot of people who actually demand a lot of cool new features all the time. But there's not enough people that actually complain that what we have is not good enough or they don't understand it. So there's a lot of shame in people saying like, oh, I don't understand that, so I'm not going to bother commenting on it or talking about it. But please file these issues. I want to learn about very basic things that we can do better. And simplifying the interface is a very important thing. One great feature we found is like we had a lot of complaints that people said developer tools open and I don't want them. And we were wondering what the hell is going on there because it's not that easy to do them. Turns out there's actually a lot of keyboards with an F12 key that's sticky. Or people tried to change the volume on a Mac and pressed F12 accidentally, so the developer tools opened for people randomly, and they didn't want to know. They were no developers, so they were just confused about that thing. So we basically put the first time you press F12, now you get a warning and say like, "Hey, that opens developer tools. Do you always want to open developer tools, or do you want to never see them?" And we got a lot less users because of that, but we got a lot less unhappy users as well. So looking into the use cases was a very exciting thing for us. We also got a lot of reports that people said they accidentally closed tabs. And I was like, how is that possible? And then it turns out we looked at the locale of the reports that we got, and these were all from Asian countries, like kanji characters. And whereas like we have a tab called network or whatever it is in Polish, probably something really, really long without any vowels in it. And it's hard to press the X there. If you have a Chinese 2 letters, then the X is easy to hit. So we realized that we have a bit more space in there just by looking at the feedback and looking at the locales. So my biggest problem is that I don't get enough feedback from people that are just having inconvenience, having a little thing. I get a lot of people asking me like, oh, why can't I have React tools or the developer tools? And you're like, well, because we're not React and we're not actually, then we have to do them for Vue and for Angular and for others as well. So it's great that you're excited about it, but I think it's important to just feel courageous about it as well. And if you give feedback, there's a feedback system in there. Please give us an email, because we might have questions. And even if we don't have questions, the most frustrating thing I get right now, we get about 700, 800 reports a day. And often it's very simple things that go wrong to people. And I'm like, okay, there would be one sentence that I could send that person back. But as I didn't get an email, I can't tell them about it. So it's actually frustrating for both sides. Somebody vented that they couldn't use it, but I can't help them either. And that's a problem.
What can the community do to help you?
I think it's also important to give us feedback on how you use the things, what things you really use. And I wish people would get less pushy when it comes to like new features all the time. It is very frustrating to see people, oh, I would love to have this, when you do a video of a new feature. And they're like, oh, that's great. If you do that, my favorite is like, if you do that, I will choose Edge as my main browser, which I don't do now. And I'm like, okay. And then you look at the numbers, then you look at the usage afterwards, and nothing happens. Like, there's a lot of cool features that have been in the developer tools by Chrome and by others as well, that have been in keynotes at big conferences, and everybody was super excited about them. And when you look at the usage statistics of how many people are really using that, it's in the single digits per month. So we get very excited about the cool new thing, but we don't actually just look at like, where do I get stuck every day? How can I do something better? How can I make something easier? So I think it's important for people to give us feedback on just like simple things that annoy you every day, that are easy to fix, and also understanding that a product that is shipped with a browser in an operating system needs to be for a lot of people out there, and needs to be for a lot of different communities. So I hate the arrogance of people saying like, okay, I use React and everybody uses React. And you're like, no, that's not the case. So it's like until we have this kind of super world that we have with VS Code, that you can extend the things yourself, great. And the community, what can they do? They can talk to people about new features. They can review them as well, and they can give us feedback. It's all on GitHub. It's all open, so you can actually give us reports there. And feedback is the most important thing. If you want to contribute with code, that would be even cooler. And it's a great environment to work in. I mean, as a JavaScript developer, I was really excited to start working on developer tools, because I'm in a controlled environment. I can use all the cool new JavaScript features that I wanted to, because they're in that environment. And it's still HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like, nothing in there is any C# or anything that I don't know about programming. So I can actually play with that thing. You can try it yourself. You can open the developer tools on developer tools and inspect the developer tools with a second window. So you can always look under the hood, which brings me back to how I learned programming, that looking under the hood is the most important thing for me.
That sounds crazy. Chris, what are some things you are proud of having achieved in this role, and how did you do it?
I'm very excited about the integration. We call it a better together story. And that basically means, we have the developer tools in the browser, and they try to do everything. They try to be an editor. They try to be a debugging environment. They try to be a visual editor for things like animations. And the editing part of it was never something that I liked. I mean, I never used the sources tab to write code. Although you could, it's a fully integrated developer tool or editor. But Visual Studio Code is a better editor, because I use it, and I have all kind of plugins in there, and I've got all kinds of themes in there. So very early on, when I came on the team, we had the idea of bringing the developer tools as an extension inside Visual Studio Code. So you never have to write code, go to the browser, debug, and go back to the editor to edit there. So you keep it inside Visual Studio Code. And having that extension go from like a few users to, I think we're now at 270,000 or something like that. And we see about like 150,000 active users every day. It's really, really exciting to see. And especially also that it was an iterative approach with the team, that basically we rotate our engineers every 2 months. So basically, you don't always work on the same thing in the developer tools. You work on different things. So by having it documented internally and rolled out.
Why you do that?
Basically, just it's an idea that I had in Yahoo back then in 2005 as well. There's two benefits to that. You don't have experts. You have basically everybody needs to document everything they do, so because somebody will take over from them a few weeks down the line. You don't get bored by being in part of a program, part of the tool that you don't want to work on. You don't, if you're not excited about what you do right now, you're not stuck there for the next 5 years. You're stuck there for a certain period of time, and it also is great for sharing information. So if somebody leaves the company, or somebody gets sick, or somebody can't be there for their family, information doesn't go away. The information is shared across the whole team. So I think it's a very powerful way to make sure that your employees are actually excited about the work that they do, and that everybody learns from each other. So you cannot be like the perfect expert in the corner that doesn't talk to anybody and writes this monolithic piece of software that nobody understands. But you're actually everybody needs to document what they're doing automatically, and I think that's a very cool thing to do. And it also, for me as a PM, it was interesting to see getting new developers come in every few iterations and bring new ideas in. So they actually read up on getting started and actually, I always wanted to do that. What do you think of that? So you get a lot of information that way as well. So I think that's a really, really interesting thing. So that extension, I'm super excited about what a success it's become. And now we're actually working on making it work with Visual Studio as well, not only Visual Studio Code. And that's the next step in that environment. So we also integrated Visual Studio Code in the browser tools. So if you go to any local file now, so you have a localhost file and you open the browser and you open developer tools, it says, oh, you're on a local file. Do you want to use Visual Studio Code as your editor instead of the browser tools? So we recognize that it's actually a much better way for people to do it. And I think it was exciting to see that happen, because I worked with the Visual Studio Code team and not our team only. And I also worked with other third parties like Google and other people in the Chromium world to make sure we can actually make that happen. So I'm very proud of having released that right now. And that's just the first step. I want to do much more about making developer tools a thing that goes somewhere else and integrates with what you already use, rather than just asking you to read up on it and learn about them.
How big is your team, and how is structured?
Well, we kind of like put a word on it already. I think we're like 30 by now, and it's 5 PMs and 1 PM manager, and there's I work with 2 engineering leads. And I think all in all, it's like 22 engineers under that right now. And that's only for developer tools. That's not on the whole of Edge. The whole of Edge is much more, and also distributed. And we're most of them in America. I was the first European, and now there's 2 more as well. And I said the team structure is different pods. So basically, we look at like first party, which is like talking to company internal people, third party, which is end user research and finding and getting new features from end user research. And then there's Better Together story, which is ours, and a few other like the automation and things under the hood that we need ourselves. And we rotate the team around every few months. We run sprints every 2 weeks. We release every 4 weeks, and that's basically we contribute to the Chromium project. So everything we put, everything we do in there can also be used by other parts of the Chromium project.
So releasing one time in a month is enough? Is okay?
We release every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. Okay,
but we release stable every month.
Okay.
But we release beta, developer, and we release the Canary nightly. Okay. So nightly you can have a different thing. Interestingly enough, the extension that I talked about, the Edge Dev tools for Visual Studio Code, is not part of that. So we release anytime we want to. So we're not beholden to the 2 weeks process. We just basically release whenever we want on that one. But I think it is enough in terms of what we can do. But hot fixes, of course, are possible. So often we have things that we can release within a day as well. So it's not that much of an issue. But it's huge. I mean, rolling out for every Windows machine out there a new version of Edge is quite a task, and it's still quite fascinating to see that button being pressed and seeing this going out. It's really interesting to see.
What's going on in the development stack for the web that puzzle you?
I think there's an overall complexity that I don't understand. Like we've been working on the web platform, and it's great. We have offline functionality. We have camera access. I just talked to a colleague who did like a WebXR thing for metaverse, only using JavaScript, and it performs really, really well. And at the same time, we keep talking about abstractions. We keep talking about you need to have React to start a website. You need to have Next, Vue, Angular to start a website. It's the modern way of doing things. And I think there's nothing more annoying than the word modern. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, jQuery was modern. Like DHTML was modern. Like modern is the most fleeting thing out there. So when you get feedback and they say like, I showed, for example, how you can edit something in the developer tools live and it changes the code inside Visual Studio Code. So you don't lose the changes any longer. And that took us ages to build. And 90% of the feedback was like, yeah, but I use modern technologies like React and not like the web stuff. And you're like, well, React generates the web stuff. In the end, you're also using those. So I understand that you're coming from a different point of view, but I think it's very important to understand that modern is the most fleeting thing ever. And we fought for a long time to have standards. We made sure that you're actually not having to build a web product for every single browser out there. You don't have to write a Safari version and an Edge version and a Chrome version and a Firefox version. We have standards for that kind of stuff. And we keep going away to put extra complexity into it for developer convenience. And it becomes a landfill over time. I mean, I talked to a team the other day, and they're using jQuery on a product still, and then they use React on top of that. So basically, you use jQuery to make DOM manipulation easier, and then you use a virtual DOM on top of that, which means the whole jQuery thing is unnecessary. But it's still in there, and every extra abstraction that you put on a product on the web is an implication to performance and is an implication to security as well. When you look at the versions of old, outdated JavaScript libraries and frameworks out there, these are all a great way to attack a product. These are all, either you keep them up to date all the time, which nobody does, or you created a potential security risk by relying on something there. The other thing that I always understand, but it also drives me nuts, is that we always try to use things too early. There's a new API on the web. Let's say I can access my fridge through JavaScript. It takes about half a year for it to be standardized. It takes about another half year until all the browsers roll it out. And people want to use it on the first day. So they write a JavaScript library to abstract it, to do something, or to simulate it. And then everybody is super excited because they can already use this new functionality without the browsers and the editors to have to catch up. And then when it's supported any longer, they chase the next new thing and write another abstraction for that. The idea of a polyfill, I love that Remy Sharp came up with the idea of a polyfill where it says like, it's in there until it's not needed anymore. So you test for a certain navigator.fridge, and if it's not available, then you actually put your code in there, or you hot load your code. But this is not what people do. They just rely on these things, and the abstractions never die. They never go away. And we just add to the landfill of the web. We put more and more code in there. So sometimes the great thing is we got previews of browsers. We got previews of all the editor environments. You can actually put your code in there. And that if Navigator Fridge works until it's supported. So if it's not supported yet, this code will not be called. So you're in the same environment, but you didn't put that extra thing in there that, again, can become a maintenance nightmare or a security issue. So I think a bit of like patience in terms of like using these things would be interesting for us and for the end users as well. And more focus on the end user. Like Do people want to connect their fridge to your website or to a personal blog? Probably not. So it was interesting when we moved from when we created a new browser and we deleted a lot of old code that we didn't need anymore. There's nothing more rewarding as a developer to delete code that's not needed any longer. But we don't do it on the web because a lot of times we just build a product and then move on to the next one and send it off to somebody else to do maintenance. And I think the having more love for your product and having more patience for the end users would be an interesting thing to have. I hate these shortcuts that we keep using that like, okay, this is not supported yet, but my version does it. An interesting example I got the other day is like Edge has this thing on a password thing on a password field that you can say show the password or hide it, and people then basically said like, okay, Edge has it, others don't have it, so I write my own in JavaScript, and then I actually detect if it's Edge and hide the one of Edge until it's supported by others as well. And no, it's not. It actually makes no sense that you write that code yourself because I trust that you're a great developer, but did you do accessibility testing on it? Did you actually make sure that people can access it with a keyboard? Did you make sure that it makes sense for somebody who can't see? Did you make sure that you can control it with voice recognition? These kind of things, all these compliance things that we have to do, it's much harder than to just show an icon and basically do it there. So native functionality of the browser, overriding that one with your own written things because they're easier stylable or actually support other browsers that don't have that feature yet. People on the other browsers are not used to having that functionality. So you actually become the owner of that interface. And believe me, as an owner of interfaces, it's not fun to have that kind of control. It's actually you're dependent on a lot of work to make sure that it actually works for everybody out there. And it's kind of tough to actually just hide things away because they're not perfect or they actually don't work across other platforms. This is a convenience feature that's wonderful to have. And I think if you actually want to go that route, then don't apply your functionality to the browsers that actually support it natively. And I think that's a bigger problem that with a lot of the interface of the web not being ready is because we never had the need to fix them as browser users. We input type date. Great example. Date picker, wonderful thing to do. It's native in the platform. It's horrible in terms of support across different browsers. That's why people write their own date picker and don't use input type date. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will never be fixed in the platform if people don't use it. So that's the biggest problem that I see. We do these shortcuts. We complain about things being broken, but we don't complain to the right people. We actually say like, oh, I wrote this JavaScript solution for that problem. I'm really cool because I'm better than the browser makers. And actually, you're holding the web back because the browser makers don't have a limited amount of developers of a limited amount of time as well. So they only put people on work that actually makes sense. And if nobody asks for fixing it, we're not going to do it. And that's a big problem of the web, that we're fixing it with own solutions and with polyfills, but we don't actually complain about the platform not being ready.
You've doing JavaScript for ages. Do you see patterns that coming up in the JavaScript community?
Yeah, there's always the magical framework that fixes everything. And that is actually much better than everything else. And there's also the like, it's funny, you see people that been defending a certain practice tooth and nail, and then a half a year later when something new comes out, they're not even interested in feedback any longer. So I think the abandonment of new ideas and new products is a big thing that keeps coming back. And also it's great to see that people build on top of the work of others. So that's really nice. I think that changed to the past. Everybody wanted to build their own thing. So that's really good. But I think it's kind of alluding to what I just said. Like I keep seeing people writing solutions for problems that are actually problems of the operating system and the browser. And instead of supporting the browser, which are open source and which take pull requests and everything, and actually making the platform better, they're actually fixing it in an abstraction, which is kind of understandable because you cannot fix all the browsers, and you will not be able to fix Safari anytime soon because or other open products. And it's tricky, and you might think you're not in control, but we want to make the web better. Every browser maker wants to make the web better. And of course, you can fix things with JavaScript, but then you're also creating something that you have to maintain, or a community has to maintain for you for the next few years. And that's not a thing that happens, sadly enough. Abandonment of cool solutions that fix the problem is a very common thing. And that's a pattern that I keep seeing. So there's this drive to invent quick solutions for future problems instead of actually analyzing the future problem and finding out if it's really how it can be fixed the best way. I mean, I remember Flash and video embedding, and that was like a big thing in the past. And nowadays, like video element, put it in there, it works, and it's stylable and everything. So we find solutions in the platform as well. They just take a bit longer. And I think just because it's easy to use yet another abstraction to fix a problem for you right now, think about the future, and if you want to remove it in the future, and how hard it would be to remove it in the future.
What is a term that people keep using that annoys you when it comes to technology and coding?
Modern. We had that. Okay. Modern is just driving me crazy. It makes no sense. I'm a modern developer. What? No, it makes no sense whatsoever to me. And it's just very frustrating if you see modern becoming horrible and modern becoming unusable over the years.
Exactly. What is finding you had in developer tools that may surprise people?
When you look at the numbers of the users tools, we have basically the Elements tool, we have the sources, we have the Elements tool, we have the network tool on the console, and these are making up for 90% of the usage. Everything else is abandoned. Everything else is just used by experts from time to time. So all the functionality, all these cool things you see in keynotes at JavaScript conferences of the tooling that, everybody wanted that, so we have it right now. It's not being used by many people, and it's just fascinating to see. I love the little things that you get feedback from bits where you just didn't expect it to go. For example, mobile emulation. I love mobile emulation in the browser because I don't have to use my phone, and it gives me like an insight of what it's going to be. But we found out that a lot of people in the past, until they fixed it right now, used mobile emulation to upload images to Instagram, because on desktop you couldn't upload Instagram images. So they used mobile emulation to use Instagram because it's much easier to upload it from a desktop than to upload from a mobile phone, and much faster in many environments. So you see these use cases of our tools that you didn't expect, and it's exciting to see. And of course, when it comes to browser usage, I remember back in Mozilla, and I remember back also in our case, you see people. We had one person, I remember, in Mozilla that had 167,000 bookmarks or something like that. Or you see how many tabs people have open. Wow. And you're just like, how can you do this? It's just exciting to see what's going on there. I also find that tools that I love can be super confusing for people. Like I love, for example, the issues panel that we have right now. And as soon as you open the browser developer tools, it says like there's 12 issues, there's these problems, and here's how to fix them. But a lot of people get very angry about that. Like, I don't want to learn about these problems. My boss sees that there's problems in the software, so I have to fix them now. And you're like, yeah, what kind of developer are you if you don't want to fix those problems? Like, this is very bizarre. Of course, making it possible to filter on things that you can't fix, that are not your problem, is something that we're doing right now, and we learned that from that. But I see a lot of people that basically are completely overwhelmed by these developer tools, and we see usage of it that is completely wrong. And nobody talks about that. Nobody admits to that. And there's no failure on your part. If it's hard to use, it's a failure on our part. If the interface is too hard to use, then we made a mistake, not you. Our tools should never make you feel stupid. Our tools should make you get to the result easier that you need to get to. So if there's something that confuses you, report it. And that's something that I want to see more.
Yeah, I think we have to do something with the tabs, because I saw a lot of people, they open 20, 30, 40 tabs and navigate between them, and it looks crazy, but they do it. Yeah. So Yeah.
Well, we have tab groups now. Have you seen that?
No.
It's really, really cool. You can have a label, and then you basically put tabs in there, and then you can expand and collapse the label.
Okay.
So in my case, I've got now 4 tabs on my browser, but I've got 5 to 7 tabs in each of them.
Okay.
So it's not showing everything at the same time.
Yeah, I have to try it. How do you measure the success of developer tools?
Well, it's tricky because we got the activation numbers. We know how people interact with it. We know when people open it. We know when people do something with it. We put telemetry on almost everything that it doesn't record you. We want to know if the thing is actually being clicked and if it was successfully clicked or not. So we also can measure the time of how long people have in there. But that's a big discussion that I have right now. Our market is actually addicted to time. People say, okay, Facebook is much more successful than my government website because people spend 16 hours in it a day. That is what we want to have for everything. But Facebook is an addiction machine. It's meant for people to stay in there and do everything in there. Same as TikTok, same as Instagram, same as all the other things. So how long the developer tools have been open, to me, is actually an indicator that people didn't get to the result that they needed to get to. I want to get more into like a way to measure how do people use these things to fix a problem that they have and then close it again. To me, that's a success. If they open it, don't understand it, and close it immediately, that's a failure. But just the amount of times that people interact with something and the amount of time that people stay in a certain product, to me, is only sensible in a product that has content in them and it's not a tool. So it's very interesting to have these discussions right now. What can we measure, and what does this information mean? So we learn by usage how people open something, that this is a feature that they want to have more, and then we actually put new nuances in there, do some more UX work on that one, make it easier to use, and then we see the numbers go up. So we have telemetry, but we also have feedback, and the feedback is another thing where we measure we measure how successful something is. We do also analysis on the feedback, so there's automatic was it positive, was it negative, which of course is a machine learning thing that might be quality controlled, but it's interesting to see. I think the success factor that I want to have is like, developer tools, doesn't matter how long you do in them. It matters that you actually fix the problem that you had. But as we don't know the problem that you need to fix, it's an issue. But that's something that I actually break my head over right now. And that's something I want to fix in the next 2 to 3 years to see how we can really measure the success of it, which is a reoccurring theme, because with DevRel, I had the same issue. How do you measure the success of DevRel? Oh, 6,000 people at the conference saw my talk. Okay. How do we know which of those became customers for your company? How do we know which of you used the thing that you have afterwards? How do you measure that? It's a tricky bit to actually have in there. And again, it comes back to feedback. I mean, my partner keeps looking at me strangely when we go to a restaurant or we go to a hotel, and I give feedback on Google or on Booking.com afterwards. And I think it's just very important to give that information. It's very important for people to learn what the end users have. And in a developer space, it's the same thing. We want to know how happy you are with the product or what you want to have. And we want you to think about what you really need, not like what would be cool to have. We have enough in there that's cool to have that nobody uses, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, exactly. So what is a feature you are really excited about that people should play with?
I love the developer tools integration with CSS mirroring that we do right now. That basically, my problem was always like, I go to the browser, I use the styles tool to fix my styles, and then once I've done that, I have to go back to my source code and start writing that code that does these changes. With CSS mirroring, we actually have that now built into the extension and also soon into the browser, where you basically, you do the changes and your source code changes at the same time. So you're using the visual tools and you change the source code. The whole copy and paste step is gone. So I'm super excited about that one. That's part of the extension at the moment. the Microsoft Edge DevTools for Visual Studio Code. I wish there was a shorter name. We probably have one soon. That's a great feature. And myself, I'm absolutely blown away by GitHub Copilot. It's the extension for Visual Studio Code that actually analyzes your code and does auto-completion of code using open source code that was on GitHub and solutions that were basically on Stack Overflow and stuff. And it's ridiculously good. It's like, I mean, most of the time, let's face it, we find a problem, we don't know how to code it, we go to Stack Overflow, we look up, we get the first result, we copy and paste the code back into our code, change some numbers around, and hope everything is fine. Having that by hand, that copy and paste, makes no sense. So we basically, GitHub Copilot does that for you, and it's so clever. The other day I had I'm actually going to write about that. It's I have this dice throwing thing that I wrote for myself. I just wrote about that because I was offline in that holiday. And I just wanted to do a keyboard thing as well, that if you press enter, it would also do the rolling of the dice. And I just wrote document add event listener key up. And then the auto completion of Copilot analyzed my code and gave me the perfect code for that. Realized I probably want to use enter, so it gave me the 13 key code, and found out which of my methods was actually the one that did the rolling of the dice. So I basically, with one tap completion, I wrote the code that I would have written myself anyway. So it's not that it's only magic from the internet that you use other people's code. That this product actually learns from your usage of it. And that to me is the perfect interface. I want any interface to realize, like, okay, you press that button 15 times, these 3 buttons 15 times in succession. Do you want to have one button that does these 3 actions? So I want our interfaces to learn from our usage, and GitHub Copilot does that right now. And it's only going more and more places. Also, the integration of Visual Studio Code on the web, like VS Code.dev, is also ridiculous. Like, you go to any GitHub repo right now, you press the full stop button, and you get Visual Studio Code in your browser with that GitHub repo open in it. So you can edit that thing and actually contribute to it without actually downloading it, without forking it, without using it on your machine. So being able to integrate the developer environments into something else, because they're all web-based technology, is a super exciting thing.
Yeah, sounds really cool. What do you think is needed to get us to become more effective as a community?
I think we need more community thinking. We need less hero thinking and less like, oh my God, these are these cool people that are basically giving presentations and having YouTube channels, and I'm only a lowly developer that actually uses their stuff. Everybody has something to say, and everybody has something to contribute. And everybody also has the right to call somebody out who's a good, well-known person that something they said might not be right and might be easier to do. You can do that not publicly as well. I think it's very important that as a community, we start doing more community building and less of like making isolation. Like the big problem is like we talk about at events, we talk about things into the future or cool new technology that's happening right now, but we fail to actually implement it. Like, I see this huge gap between products that are live, products that are being used by people, and technology that we say should be used. Like, when you look at the HTTP archive and you see that like there's almost no service workers rather than just demos out there, it's just depressing how much work we put into that and how much excitement we have about these things and not use them afterwards. So using these cool new things that everybody's excited about, kicking the tires and trying them out in real life products or or finding real world solutions that need those is, I think, a very important thing. And I would love to get more stories of newcomers, like people who came in and say like, I was confused about that. This is what I didn't like, to get into the community. So we learn as a community how to become more welcoming and how to become better at like getting new people from more diverse backgrounds in, rather than being a gatekeeper and saying like, oh, you got to use that or it's not modern and it's not perfect. So I think it's important that we get better as a community to be a community and one community as well. I think when you look at I mean, you know more than me, but if you look at the event space right now, there's Vue events, there's React events, there's Next.js events, there's JavaScript events, there's CSS events. we're all doing the same thing. We're all building the same products together. So we're all building shit for the web. So it shouldn't be like that these communities all talk to each other, finding the same solutions for the same problems. Maybe that would be one way to get that abstraction addiction that we have out of people, by just like having more inclusive conferences. And I've seen those. I've seen React talks at a JavaScript conference. That was great. I want to see more of those things and not only like focus on one community.
Yeah, exactly. So how can people learn more about what you do?
Well, I mean, I'm on GitHub, I'm on Twitter, I'm on christianheilmann.com, my blog. And I think Twitter is where I say a lot of things. The blog is where is the source of truth. That's where all my information goes. That is for longer time. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm on Facebook and other places as well, but I'm not that responsive there. It's more like a personal thing. I'm on LinkedIn as well. If you need some advice for your job or looking for a job, that's also a place to go. It's interesting because as a developer, you hate LinkedIn, but sometimes when I do technical publishing on LinkedIn, I reach directors from companies that then help their developers use that stuff. So any channel has its benefits.
By the way, what do you think about TypeScript? Because we talk a lot about JavaScript, but what do you think about TypeScript? Is there any chance that TS will completely replace JS in the coming years?
I think it's tricky because the good thing about TypeScript is JavaScript. It's just a type system on top of JavaScript. I think the developer tools that we have, or Edge, or any other huge product, would be much, much harder if we use JavaScript only. The type model gives us much better tooling in the developer tools or in the editors. It actually gives us a safety that we don't have in JavaScript, because we cannot do things nilly-willy that we wanted to. But replacing JavaScript with anything else is an absolute nightmare because of backwards compatibility. Like, how do you want to make sure that outdated environments that cannot get updated will still get some functionality? We've done some very clever things in JavaScript with like the module, no module thing, to only give like JavaScript with new features to those that understand it. And that's probably one way to get TypeScript in there as well. But I think the good thing about TypeScript is it is for an enterprise level or large environment, like doing your to-do list with 20 lines of JavaScript in TypeScript. You don't get much benefit from that, and you probably won't have anybody that will extend that in the future, that it will be necessary to have TypeScript for it. So having a build process and a conversion process using TypeScript itself to JavaScript that is then generated from it kind of works to me. We had the same with jQuery back then. Like everybody said, oh, jQuery, everybody uses jQuery. Why isn't jQuery in the browser? Because it's not a standard. That's why. So if we standardized TypeScript and we got it to support it by all JavaScript engines out there, and we got it through the W3C as a standard, or the ECMA as a standard, fine. But I think we learn a lot from each other in this case as well. So I don't think it's going to replace JavaScript anytime soon. It's actually interesting to see what we're going to do with WebAssembly as well, like what other languages we're going to convert to the web using that technology. But JavaScript runs the web to a degree, and removing that would be like removing the engine of a flying plane. It's not the easiest thing to do. But yeah, if you do extensive work in JavaScript and a huge product, TypeScript is something to really look into, and I'm super excited about it because it makes me a more honest developer, because I cannot do everything that I want. I have to actually document what I'm doing while I'm doing it because of the types. So that's an interesting thing to see.
So I don't need to change the name of the conference from JS Poland to TS Poland.
No, you can do a TS Poland conference for enterprise people, or like for more general. JavaScript will be here for quite a while.
Yeah. Do you remember the first edition of JS Poland conference 5 years ago?
Yeah, I still got a lot of stuff here. I mean, I've got I got this towel from one of the companies there that I'm still using, okay. And it's great. I mean, like I like going to Poland. It's really easy for us to do here, but right now we can't. Sadly.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you will be performing at JS Poland soon. So, what do you prepared for this year?
I'm going to talk about the Better Together story that I was talking about. That like, where do we go with tooling in the nearer future? Like, where the problems lie? What can we do? And I'm going to cover that gap that I was talking about. That like the demands that we get from a small group of people that think that's what tooling should be like, and missing out on a lot of people that have to do a day-to-day job and don't get the tools that they want. So I want to talk about like how we came to actually work to put the features in that we have right now that are new and why we put them in there. And it's going to be a call to action for people to say like, okay, if you think that's going the wrong direction, we're happy to do it differently. But I think it's very important to understand for people that every developer tool out there is for you as a developer. You are our users. You are our audience, and you're most important for that. You're also super important for the market itself. Like, developers are early adopters. They're people that try things out first, and then end users will get them 1 or 2 years later. And I think it's very important to understand that your voice is super important for us to get new information and to build the right things. So hopefully I'm going to show you into how this whole thing came around, what we did to make it work, and how it works under the hood, and get you excited to be part of it, because it is open source and you can be part of it.
So one more time, the easiest way to give the feedback.
GitHub.
Okay. So one word. Now is the time to some non-technical questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
What kind of person is Chris? How do you see yourself?
I'm a geek. I get excited about very detailed things at times. I also like very loud music, and I also like physical things. Weirdly enough, I don't have a car. I cycle everywhere. I like being in a city. I love living in the city rather than in the countryside, because I grew up in the countryside. And I think I'm good with listening to people and seeing growth opportunities in them. I really like to. I get more excitement from growing people around me or making them better than just doing everything myself, because I'm also inherently lazy. I don't want to do the things the whole time. I just want to copy myself, so to say, and spread my tasks out to other people. So I think that's something that worked in the past really well, and hopefully it works out nicely too. And it's great to be surrounded by people that ground you, that basically have nothing to do with what you are. Like my partner doesn't know any JavaScript or computers or anything like that. So nothing I do impresses her. And I think it's very important to have people like that around you. It's really good to see that.
What kind of music you like?
I'm very much a punk person.
Okay.
Punk, ska, hardcore, these kind of things. But there's generally everything that is, when I hear I make it louder, is good music. So I'm very varied. I love Leonard Cohen as well and these kind of things. So there's only fluff music I don't like. I like lyrics. If lyrics are there, then good lyrics, then I'm happy.
Do you have some hints for us regarding self-organization?
I mean, I did a whole course on that to a degree, how to set up your development environment on Skillshare. In general, I think it's important that, especially with the working from home thing, to have an agenda, to basically say like, okay, I'm now going into work mode. So I'm putting on clothes. I'm putting on different clothes. I dress up to go to work. I dress up to go to the office. So I dress up to sit in front of my computer when I'm working as well. I also turn off all the distractions, that like my personal stuff that normally does nothing to do to work. I turn that off. So I got different profiles on my computer for that. And I also I make sure that weekends are off limits. Like weekends, I don't turn on the computer. I don't actually do any work. I only, I'm forced to because of my partner. And it's great because it basically means it's very easy as a computer geek who's excited about everything computer to work 24/7. And I think it's very important to put these boundaries out for yourself. So get up in the morning, have your breakfast, do your stuff, and then go to work, even if it means sitting down on your computer and opening your laptop. And also close it for lunch break. Do these extra things that you would normally do in the office as well, because it's very important to have a life outside of work as well, because otherwise you burn out really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Favorite hobbies?
I love movies. I used to love going to cinema, impossible now, but I'm horrible at that. And I watch every making of, every behind the scenes, every director's commentary of the movies. And I know quite a lot of people in the movie industry as well. And I thought about going into that a long time ago. And I think it's a very, very cool art form out there. I'm really excited about that one. And retro computing, like I'm still doing things in the demo scene on Commodore 64 and
Wow.
pixel art from like pixeling in like 160 by 200 pixels, these kind of things. That's something I have fun with as well. So it's nothing shocking in terms of hobbies. You would expect these kind of things.
Nothing shocking. So thank you so much for providing a lot of valuable information during this recording. So finally, can you recommend any interesting podcast or book to our audience?
Oh, that's tricky. I'm a big fan of Firebase on YouTube. They did a Fireship dev that he did some really good stuff. I have to look it up. You called me out on that one. I will send you a link with all the things that I'm watching. But I'm actually reading a book right now called Notes from a Nervous Planet. And it's about digital detox. And it's about actually how the social media information that we get all the time made people more nervous and actually more angst-ridden and problematic than before. So it's a very interesting thing to analyze your own social interaction. Like, oh, you wake up in the morning, open your phone, read the first things. That's not a normal way of living. So I think that's a very, very interesting book. And there's another book that I when I started my new job, and okay, it's a very inappropriate title. It's called Unfuck Yourself. And it's actually very much about like looking at yourself and seeing yourself as a victim of your environment and seeing yourself as like, oh, I would never be able to do that. I'm too stupid for that kind of thing. It was a very reassuring self-help book that is not a self-help book. So it doesn't have that like wishy-washy language in it. It's very to the point, and I found it a very interesting read. And in general, I mean, I'm not that much of a podcast listener because I don't drive by car and I don't know when I would listen to it. But I watch YouTube videos a lot on developer things. So I'm really excited about that one. But yeah, then again, my as we had the work-life balance, my work right now as a principal manager is a lot. So when I'm clapping down my laptop, I'm closing my laptop, I go and watch movies. I don't do more of the technology stuff any longer. I'm more of a reader than a listener and a viewer though. Like I'm still using RSS feeds I'm using Feedly for my information. And I got about 600 of them that I go through every day. And there's lots of good information that way. So everything I tweet about, I learn from RSS feeds rather than just like other social media channels. Interesting one.
So it seems that work-life balance is really important for you.
Yeah, I'm old. And the older you get, the more important it gets. I think it's a very, you realize like you can live for your work, but you can also have a life outside. And I think there's a lot of problems in the world right now. People are actually socially disconnected from each other. So if you find time to talk to your friends and family, do that as well. I think it's a very important thing.
Chris, thank you so much. It was an amazing conversation. But to see you on JS Poland in just 1 week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for today.
Right. Yeah, see you in a week. Good luck with the organization.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
See you soon.